Good morning. It's Jason Dean coming live at you again for a new Film Fanatic video. Hope everyone's doing good. Hope everyone had a good weekend. The weather was pretty nice for the most part. Yesterday was a little bit cloudy, but it uh, it did rain. Surprise, surprise. But pretty cloudy, overcast day. It's Monday at about 9:53. So yeah, it was good. I did a new show, and I just posted it yesterday. I went to the fabulous Waldo Theater on Saturday night and saw probably pound for pound the greatest anime movie ever made, and that is Akira. Um, so I did a big show on that, and that was so awesome to see on the big screen. It was, and I've always described the experience around. It can be, say, a movie that I've seen countless times, and when I see it on a really good Blu-ray edition, I see it in a really great Blu-ray edition version, 4K. It's usually like seeing it for the first time again, even though I've seen it, probably, maybe hundreds of times before. And the same thing happens when, you know, uh, occasionally when there are these classic movies that are put back into the theater, and there's a really good, version of that that's going to be shown. It's that same experience. It's like watching it for the first time, and seeing Akira, and it was, a primetime example of that. Akira is a film I have always loved. Kind of grew up watching it and seen it so many times. And I'd only seen different. I've seen it, mostly on just DVD. I've seen it on a couple of different editions. I remember seeing it on a real standard kind of DVD version, and then I remember seeing it a few times on like a collector's remastered edition DVD, and the quality was pretty spectacular, in that format. But to see it on the big screen and at a beautiful theater was that same kind of experience. Like it was like seeing it for the first time, and it was wonderful. So the Waldo Theater is the best. I think the best thing around when it comes to movies, especially when it comes to the organization that is Waldo After Dark, which specializes in putting out most of the movies that they show are these great kind of cult exploitation classics from the late 70s, 80s. Particularly, most of the movies I've seen there have been in the 80s. Just amazing. I've seen quite a few movies there. The biggest one for me, or the one that just remember from the top of my head, is Maniac Cop. Love that movie to death. A classic slasher movie. That was amazing to see on the big screen. And again, it was that same kind of experience. One thing I'm super excited is they're going to be showing two Dario Argento movies coming up. Dario Argento just turned, I think he just turned like 88 or 89 years old, and he's still going. So they're going to be showing, one of the movies that they're going to be showing is Suspiria. And to see that on a big screen is going to be just probably transcending. So super excited about that. And and it was funny because when I was at the theater with a couple of friends, I met a couple of friends there. I was talking to my friend Aaron, who's a really close friend, and we go to a lot of movies together. I was saying, well, it's great that all of these great movies that they show, and a lot of these movies are from my, in my favorite style and from my favorite decade. But I was like curious and wondering, would they ever show, any of the classic slasher movies? Like I was one of the titles I threw out was, what about if they, did a show where they had the New York Ripper from Lucio Fulci, my favorite Italian director. Like that would be so sick to see that on a big screen. But then I was asking her and I kind of wondered like maybe they have some kind of cutoff point, or because I notice a lot of the films that they show, they don't really show a lot of the kind of grimy, sleazy slasher movies. They don't really, you know, primetime example of that is like the New York Ripper, which is one of the sleaziest and one of the most brutal movies ever made. They don't really show anything, kind of in that vein. So I was curious, well, maybe they have a little bit of, I don't know, a sensitivity to that, or there's some kind of ratings thing that they need to do or to use to be able to show something like that. Because it's a brutal movie and it's super sleazy and it's, totally insane. But that genre and that style is my favorite. Another movie I thought would be amazing to see on the big screen would be Pieces, the great Spanish horror exploitation slasher movie, which is one of the greatest slasher movies ever made. Or even My Bloody Valentine would be awesome to see on the big screen. But I noticed they don't really show any of those films. And while we were talking about that, I saw in the on the marquee they had a little coming attractions thing. I saw that they were going to show Suspiria, and I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Because Suspiria is brutal as all hell, and that movie is just amazing. So I'm like, oh, okay, maybe they will go there. So we'll see. And I got to check the dates. I'm really uh, super pumped to see something like that on the big screen. The I recently bought Suspiria on Blu-ray, and like I've talked about that movie before. It's come up quite a bit. I think it's safe to say that Dario Argento and in particular the film Suspiria, those films, that film and that director Dario are probably the most popular, or he's probably the most well known name in the world of Italian horror, and he's a guy that is so well known that I think people who are into horror films that haven't really, say, taken the time to explore the world of Italian cinema or European cinema, particularly in the slasher genre, or the more kind of sleazy films that came out during that time. That name, people know of that film. That is, commercially very, very well known. His name is kind of a household name, rightfully so. I mean, he's one of the greatest, and that's one of the greatest movies, one of the most influential movies in the world of Italian cinema. So there was a remake of Suspiria that came out, and I haven't seen it yet, but I heard it's actually really good. I do want to see it, but I feel like I don't know. Part of me has reservations about it because I'm like, how can it top such a masterpiece? But I've heard it's really good. So, but that being said, I mean, there's so many great films that would be just amazing to see on the big screen, especially around all of the wonderful and inspiring slasher films. So today's show is on a movie that is simply a masterpiece. I wasn't sure if I had ever seen it before. I don't. After watching, I watched it last night, and I came to the conclusion I had never really seen it before. It's a movie I heard about for many, many years. Sergio Martino's Torso. Sergio Martino, I have the last few months. I have bought a few of his movies on Blu-ray, and one of the greatest, probably easily one of the greatest directors in the world of Giallo. Giallo films are such a unique, it's such a unique art form of filmmaking. It's a very distinct form. It has a very distinct flavor. It has Giallo films always have a certain amount of like characteristics or traits that kind of make them into a Giallo film. And there's the two genres I always feel that are uniquely Italian are, the spaghetti western, Sergio Leone, though that is a very particular style that emerged out of Italy in the 50s and 60s. Their version of kind of like the American western, those and that genre is typically really brutally, just so brutal, so much brutality. They're so violent. They're very dark. There's not really this kind of hero figure in the storyline most of the time. But it's the spaghetti western as a genre is such a unique thing. It has, it's the Italians created that style, and it's very very unique and has a very distinct flavor to it. And the other style of filmmaking is the giallo style. That also has a very distinct flavor to it and aesthetic. And basically, the Italians kind of were very influenced by their by you know Agatha Christie stories, basically that came from England. And the giallo style is basically their version of more or less like an Agatha Christie story, where there's a lot of mystery and suspense, a big time influence from Alfred Hitchcock. There's always the gloved killer. There's always the killer who uses like a razor blade. There's always some kind of investigative quality behind it. Lots of suspense. And there's always, to a degree, some kind of sleazy sexual factor, some kind of psychosexual factor to it. Just amazing. And so Torso is a movie I had heard about for a really long time. I wasn't sure. I thought I had seen it before, but I watched it last night and I got this amazing Blu-ray version of it. And I watched this last night. I realized I had never seen this before. And this movie is just like spectacular. I was blown away by this movie. It's got a really awesome introduction by Eli Roth, pretty famous American director. But this movie is so incredibly sleazy and so brutal, and the suspense for this movie is through the roof. I mean, big time, big time Hitchcock influence. It was directed by Sergio Martino. It came out in 1973. And, it's probably the best. I don't know. I've been buying quite a few Giallo films the last couple of years. I've really fallen in love with that style. There were a handful of movies growing up that are part of the Giallo style that I had seen as a kid, but I never really was aware of, say, the term giallo or what made them different from, say, other forms of exploitation movies. Where you have movies that have the zombie exploitation movies or the sex exploitation movies, the crime exploitation movies, and especially the horror exploitation movies. There's a lot of different, very distinct styles and variety, and you have the science fiction uh, genre also within the exploitation world. So that's the thing that's so cool about the whole world of like the grindhouse cinema, the exploitation cinema, is that there's so many different styles within under that kind of banner. One of the directors I've really gotten into is Jess Franco, and again, it's one of those things where there's so much of a thing that I like to refer to as like a, I don't know, cross pollination of all of these different styles. You have like the art house flair, the European art house. You have a little bit of like a documentary kind of flair. You have the obvious, ripping off or huge influence of like say American films that were popular. Um, you have this real pulpy, over the top kind of presentation. copious amounts of gore and violence. A lot of these directors came out of the porn industry, so that they have that kind of thing as part of their films. You have the Giallo style. I mean, it's just such a broad, range of variety, and that's the thing I'm probably most attracted to with this whole style of filmmaking. So it's just wonderful. Just an amazing world of variety. The transfer of torso on this Blu-ray package is simply amazing, and it was put out. And it's again, it's one of those things. It came out in '73, and it's timeless and just such a damn classic. It's just gorgeous. The music, everything, and the movie is really, it really does play out like a classic Hitchcock film. I mean, there's so much suspense, especially the last act of this film, and you have no idea. What I loved about this film is you have no idea who is responsible for these murders until the very end, and it's a big surprise. And I love that there are all of these male characters in the film that you think, oh, this is the guy, this is the psychopath, but then they kind of get picked off one by one, and you're like, wait, I guess it's not him. Check that guy out of the box. So, and the way it's able to be, the way the film is constructed that way, where it just pulls you in further and further, and it just creates more and more tension as the film progresses. It's pretty miraculous, and I feel like that is such a big part of what makes a Giallo film a Giallo film. Um, so many great films for Sergio Martino. All the Colors of the Dark, 1972. The Strange Vice of Mrs. Warder, which I have on Blu-ray, which is an amazing film. One of the greatest Giallo films ever. Of course, that came out in '71. Torso came out in '73. I mean, just amazing. In 1972, he directed Your Vice is a Locked Room. Slave of the Cannibal God, which I've heard a lot about and I have never seen. Heard that movie is amazing. That movie, I believe, is a little bit more of a horror exploitation movie. That came out in '78. Island of the Fishman in '79. Hands of Steel in 1986. Sergio Martino, definitely one of the great Italian directors. I mean, amazing, amazing. Super sleazy, just kind of great character studies. But there's so much suspense in his films. The Great Alligator River in '79. Craving Desire in '93. The Suspicious Death of a Mind in '75. The Wife on Vacation in 1980. Sex with a Smile in '76. Trainer on the Beach in 1984. Just incredible. Just incredible. There's a really great, it's not incredibly long, but there's a really great interview with Sergio Martino that was just done. This, I believe this edition, this came out on Blu-ray, which is one of the best companies around, one of my favorite companies. Blue Underground is the company that I've talked a lot about before, and that company is run by the one and only Bill Lustwig, who is one of my favorite horror exploitation directors. For me, he made the greatest slasher movie ever made, and that is Maniac. I love that movie to death. That movie is just incredible. That, speaking of seeing certain movies on the big screen, that would be amazing to see that at the Waldo Theater. That movie is so incredible. It's definitely one of the most brutal movies I've ever seen. some people don't. I've seen that movie reviewed and talked about, and people will acknowledge it as being just a down and nasty experience, but they're so disturbed by the film that they won't watch it again. I've seen that happen on YouTube with like people who are, YouTubers who supposedly are horror fanatics, and they won't watch it again. Like they'll dismiss it, and I'm just like, what? Like it's such a classic, but it's one of the greatest. For my money, it's my favorite slasher movie of all time. It's just so nasty and just so down and dirty, and it just feels like, um, I don't know. It plays like a documentary in some ways. You know, but Bill Luswig, made so many great movies. Of course, Maniac Cop, the Maniac Cop trilogy, just an amazing force. He's such an awesome dude. He kind of retired from filmmaking, quite a few years ago, and he started Blue Underground. And the the work and all of the wonderful movies that he's brought to light, he's really shined a light on the whole world of grindhouse and exploitation. He's one of the biggest voices, and he's always championing this style of filmmaking. And so I kind of feel it's like that situation of where an artist or somebody who is really respected in a particular field, they do this thing of where they kind of you know they never forget where they came from. They never forget the people who inspired them, and they have this sense of where they want to pay it forward and you know put the light on the people that inspired them. And I feel that's exactly what Bill Lustig has done with Blue Underground, where they put out these beautiful editions of all of these great uh, classic exploitation movies. And I feel that's like what that is definitely the focus of what Blue Underground does. And I have quite a few. I hadn't bought any Blue Underground movies in quite a while, just because I haven't really hadn't really come across them. But lately I've been buying a lot of Severn. Severn is another just amazing company. Mondo Macabro is probably my favorite of all time. I haven't seen too many releases of theirs in the shops lately. I have quite a few of their movies, but Severn is just wonderful. Blue Underground, of course. Mondo Macabro is just wild, and there's Synapse is another company. There's a whole bunch of great companies out there, but Blue Underground and especially Mondo Macabro, those are my two favorite films. I've gotten some really amazing Lucio Fulci movies through Blue Underground, so just amazing. And their editions that they put out are just spectacular. They're all remastered. They're all taken from, and I think you could apply it. It goes for all of these companies, but they take all of the, when they restore all of these movies, they're working with the original film of those particular films. So like the quality, it's just astounding. And the thing that's so awesome is that even though it's a great balance, like part of the allure of a lot of these exploitation movies is the grimy, you know, feeling that you get not only from the story but the actual film. Like it's really rough. There's like these weird cuts, and there's like there's there's like a actual grain on the footage that makes it unique. And the thing that's so cool about these transfers is, on one hand, the film is so cleaned up and the sound quality is just amazing. You're able to, especially when it comes to European films, you're able to watch the film in its native tongue with subtitles. But they also, but and it's super clean, it's super clear. It's all remastered, but yet the film on Blu-ray or 4K still has that grittiness. It still feels kind of grimy. It still feels like maybe what it was like to actually see it in a actual cinema at the time when it came out. So it's a great balance of that. And the other thing too that I love about this, and again, this is what I did when I watched this, is it had two editions. This film has two versions of Torso on there. There's the American version, and then there's also the extended Italian version, which isn't much longer. It's about 5 or 10 minutes longer. But the thing is, there's always, with a lot of these movies, there's always kind of the dubbed English version. When a lot of these movies were distributed and put in the States and came to the States, there was, a lot of those films were dubbed, and they were dubbed with American accents. And most of the time, the public can only see the films in the dubbed version. And there's like I've said before, there's a certain charm and appeal to watch films that where they are dubbed in English, because it does add a certain layer of campiness and silliness. But I always find in my time, if you have the option to watch the original um, version, whether the country, where the movie was directed, if it was an Italian director or some European director, and you have the access or the ability to watch the original version, it's always far superior. I've done that before. Where one example, Pieces, for instance, one of the greatest slasher movies ever. It's a Spanish movie, and I have seen both versions. I've seen the American version where it's dubbed in English, and then the Spanish version where it's all in Spanish but with English subtitles. And what I have seen time and time again is that the narrative is very different. And what I've always seen, and when you watch the American dubbed version, the story for most of the films that I've seen, it just isn't as it's not as cohesive. But if you look at the original, it is more fleshed out. The editing is a little bit better. And when I, like, for example, I just was mentioning Pieces. I've seen both versions, and the Spanish version is so much better because, like, the story is more cohesive. It's easier to understand, and it makes more sense from, like, a narrative perspective. And they typically are longer in length, so there's less cuts. There's no cuts at all for a lot of the films. That was a big problem too with a lot of European movies, especially when they went to video, where a lot of films were kind of getting censored. It was during the time of the video nasties, but a lot of films were getting cut, and so you really weren't getting that impact. But so I watched this Torso had the American version and then also the Italian version, and so I watched the Italian version with English subtitles, and it's extended by about 5 or 10 minutes, and it's super badass, like so cool. So every time that's one of the coolest things, probably the coolest things about buying a lot of these films on Blu-ray 4K, is that you're able to see a version that no one's ever really seen before. So that's always my go-to thing. Whenever I put in one of these movies, I always go to the menu first and see if there's an option to watch it in its native language. And pretty much every time you always have that option, and it's awesome. So that's my go-to thing when I buy these movies, and that's usually the only way I will usually watch these movies. It's funny too, being that I'm talking about watching movies that are dubbed or versions of films that you get the chance to watch it in its native language. Like I said, I just saw Akira at the theater on Saturday, and about 2 weeks ago, it was funny. They actually the folks who run that series, the people who are in charge of Waldorf After Dark, they actually had a thing where you could vote online for which version they should show. And there was the option of watching the English dubbed version or the original Japanese version with English subtitles. And thankfully, that the original Japanese cut was won the race. So that's what they showed. And again, time and time again, it's always the native, the original version, the original cut is always superior. I just feel they're still great. A lot of the dubbed versions, and to a degree, But sometimes it's a whole different experience. It's a whole different experience. There's a movie that I really really love, which I think is one of my favorite grimy exploitation movies, and that is this Canadian movie called The Siege. And it's a Canadian movie, but there's two different versions of it. I have that on Blu-ray. I did a review on The Siege quite a while ago, but just an amazing movie. And there's an American dubbed version, or I should say an American version where it's uh, the editing and the cut is so different. The obviously it's in English as well, but it's all cut and edited differently from the original Canadian version. And I have that on Blu-ray, and I've watched both versions, and the Canadian version is like ultra just superior. There's all this like kind of weird backstory around some of the characters, and it's a little bit long, but not for the right reasons. So, just another great example. And then also another Canadian classic, My Bloody Valentine. I have that, a really great edition of that, and there's an American version and the Canadian version, and the Canadian version is far superior. There's less cuts. It's a little more gory and graphic, but just amazing. So, but I can't recommend Torso enough. Like this movie is such a representation of what Giallo is. But I also feel this movie is definitely a horror movie. I mean, it's really graphic. It's brutal as all hell. Definitely a horror movie also. But it's distinct because it's not. It's definitely a Giallo film, I would say first and foremost. But this movie is a complete masterpiece. So I highly recommend it. If I think that this would be a great gateway film. Like if you have never experienced the Giallo film, but you are probably maybe really familiar with the work of Alfred Hitchcock, this would be such a great film to start with because it plays out like a great Hitchcock film. I mean, it's just a really great suspense movie. So you can't go wrong. Sergio Martino's Torso, 1973, a masterpiece. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.